is worthwhile observing the contrast and similarities between the Gentile and Jewish reaction to this alleged movement to establish a Jewish imperialism over the world. Jewish publicists first deny it without qualification. It is all false, all a lie, all hatched up by enemies of the Jews in order to stir up hatred and murder. As the evidence accumulates, the Jewish tone changes. Well, suppose it is true, the publicists say. Is it any wonder that the poor oppressed Jews, driven to madness through their sufferings, should dream dreams of overthrowing their enemies and placing themselves in the seat of authority?
Hello, my name is John Rose, and you were listening to part of Henry Ford's book, The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. Now, Henry Ford was one of the most well-loved Americans. He started up the Ford Motor Company, was the richest industrialist at the time, and he was a very kind, loving man. But since he got into business, he found out really quickly how things worked. And the more he looked into it, he realized, my gosh, there really is a conspiracy on this planet by a small group of people. And he believed it was his duty to warn everybody about it because the media wasn't doing it, the press wasn't doing it. So he bought a newspaper and he hired the best journalists in the country, hired the best private eyes, the best investigators, sent them over to Europe, dug all the research, did all the research. They had a 7-year project to wake up America to realize we have an enemy. The world has an enemy. And it was interesting because most of the journalists and people that came on board really objected to go in this direction. It was considered taboo to do this, but Henry Ford knew that once they got into it, they would be intrigued by it. They'd want to know more, and that's exactly what happened. Every week they published an article, 80 articles altogether. They ended up putting a book together, 4 volumes, about 250 pages per volume, big, full pages, 1,000 pages altogether. And he spent $5 million on this venture. He refused to accept any advertising to keep it independent. And his whole mission was to help the world understand us, but not just the world specifically, the Jews themselves, hoping that if he could warn that group of people what the elite were doing amongst them, that they would be instrumental or be the ones that would put an end to that. And perhaps that was his fault, his misfortune or his mistake. Nowadays, people think that's a mistake. Don't go to the Jews expecting them to correct what the elites are doing. Let's go to everyone else and wake them up, but that's not the answer either. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you know the answer. The answer is to realize that they are a reflection of us. And the only way for us to change things is for us to change individually. I've mentioned this many times before. It's like there's a bell of bad behavior, like a bell-shaped curve, where 96% of us are in the middle, 2% are on the ends. If we look at IQ, for example, where we have 2% above 130, they're geniuses, and 2% below 80, they are mentally challenged. We can have the same type of bell of bad behavior where we have a small percentage that are saints on one end and the other part that are the psychopaths. Now the key here is we can't cut off the edges of the bell. We can't go around screaming at everybody, look at the edge of the bell, look what they're doing, look what they're doing. The people in the bell can't even relate to the edges of the bell. That's why they get away with doing what they're doing. And the solution isn't to point them out. That doesn't solve any problem. Henry Ford spent 7 years, $5 million way back then, trying to wake up that one race of people and saying, look what the elite are doing within your group. They're turning this place into hell. And that didn't work. And as you would imagine, how could that work? It's not the answer. The answer is to realize, why do we have this aspect of our behavior? And I was trying to think of a parable I could use to explain this. And I came up with one a while back, about the first of the year actually, where I was thinking how chickens have a pecking order. And I was thinking, what would happen if a chicken had our brains. Well, if a chicken had our brains on the pecking order, if you're at the bottom of the pecking order, you'd try to figure out some way to get at the top. So that's sort of what's happening with us. The worst of us has figured out how to get the worst of us. So the solution, once again, is to realize they are a reflection of us. We can't cut them off. We have to realize the role that we play when it comes to changing these things. Now, what's really fascinating about this story is that they sold 10 million books back then. It was the bestseller. There's only, what, maybe 100 million people back then, I believe? So that was a big percentage of the population that he was able to sell, that bought this book. And it was translated into 16 languages. And an interesting man read this book when he was falsely arrested for treason. In fact, he did exactly what Malcolm X did when he went into prison. Took advantage of that time and used it to learn and educate himself. Read a lot of books during that time. And this man, he read both of Henry Ford's book, his autobiography, My Life and Work, and he also read The International Jew. And what he did is he understood how the world worked. And he was instrumental in kicking those people out. And that was the basis of my last video. Of course, the person I'm talking about right now is Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler didn't like the way the government was being run, so he tried to do something about it. They arrested him, said he was committing treason. And after the court, he goes, "History will tear to tatters," the verdict of this court. And sure enough, it has. It was bullshit back then, it's bullshit now. But what Hitler did is he read Henry Ford's book and found out how the world works and how the elite of this group of people take over a country and keep it suffering. This is why we still have war today. This is why we still can't find a cure for a common cold or the flu or a headache or heart disease or cancer. There are simple solutions to all of this. But the sickest of us exploits the sickness in us. And remember, they're just a reflection of us. We can't point our finger. I've said this 1,000 times. I don't care who's doing what to us. I don't care if it's Jews or Jesuits or Satanists. I don't care what we call them. It's immaterial. I don't believe in punishing anyone either. That's not a solution. All we have to understand is what are they doing to us, or how are they doing this to us? Well, they're mainly doing it through the printing of our money. That makes us debt slaves. But then they take over commerce also. Instead of producing anything, they just are middlemen. And the middlemen and the bankers are the ones that are making all the money, so they have an unfair economic advantage. But remember, we shouldn't have that mentality to begin with. So the way I look at it, long ago, before the fall of mankind, man didn't have any type of pecking order. But after the fall of mankind, when we destroyed one of our senses, when we destroyed the biophotons that feeds one of our senses, we went from 6 senses to 5, we sort of developed a pecking order, where we started preying upon ourselves. That's what we got right now. So I was trying to think of a new parable instead of the chicken and the pecking order. And I was thinking, what if we had, and I haven't worked this out yet, so I'm gonna kind of play with it right now. Let's say we're in one big land, one piece of property, whatever, like a country, and we're the only ones on the planet, and there's 10,000 of us, and it's paradise, no problems. We got 3 wells that will last us 1,000 years each. Well, let's just say we've been around for 1,000 years and we ran out of the first well, and now we had to tap into the second well. Not a problem, we just switched it over and then we all got the same water. But what if the water was contaminated somehow, had some poison in it, started making us sick, and made us mean, like we have now, a dark side to our behavior. But it was all because of the water. And then what you have is that maybe 10% of the population are really, really mean, and 10% get this disease, 10% get this disease, whatever. But what happens is the 10% that are really mean, and they're like the thugs, they form a bunch of gangs. So out of these 10,000 people, you got a bunch of gangs over here, 10 here and 10 here and 10 here, and they go around and create havoc. And then finally we say, well, what are we going to do about this? You know, they're coming over here and they're forcing us to work and pay them money and all this kind of stuff. Well, how do we defeat them? Well, let's have our own little police force and be able to fight against them. But see, what we're doing now is everything is downstream. And of course, the point I'm trying to get here with this parable, I'm just kind of making up off the top of my head, is we got to stop drinking the polluted water. That's all you got to do. You see? And what if it turned into a feudal system down the road where you have a king that owns 25% of the property, has a bunch of barons that he leases out the land to. The barons go around and hire a bunch of knights that will fight in the army for the king. And so what happens is the king is leasing out the land to the barons. The baron has these knights collect a bunch of taxes, gives them some land. The knights turn around and get some serfs and give them a little bit of land, and they wait on them hand and foot. So what we have here are the knights that are the big piece of the puzzle right here. The knights are what's known as the Progerian class. And if you're in this situation, what if you're in this little village and you got 100 people there and all of a sudden these 10 guys come in and there's nothing you can do? What do? How do you defeat those guys? Only one way to defeat those guys, and that's for all you guys everywhere to stop drinking the water. That's what I mean by stop cooking cooked food. That's why we got to reach the tipping point. Things are never going to change. We can't defeat this negative aspect of ours no other way unless all of us understand the role that we play. We have to reach the tipping point so that we can change our whole collective mentality. So people won't join the Progerian class. You can't have any knights if we're all connected. Don't you see how this works? And then when we try to solve the problem with these 10 thugs that come in and steal all the stuff we worked hard for, how do we defend ourselves against them? Don't work downstream. Figure out why those thugs exist. If we stop drinking the water, what happens? We don't have that dark side to our behavior anymore. Well, that's what happens when we stop cooking our food. But remember, it's not easy to change decades worth of living. That's why I know the only way we're going to reach the tipping point is a solid food vacation. Yes, every video I do comes back to that because everything else is a waste of time. It's all downstream. Yeah, let's have some police force, some more armies. We got a bunch of bad people out there. What about the ones that are running everything? They're using the money to control us. Well, hey, we can take that tool away from them. That's downstream. We could do that. But how do you go about that when everyone's sick? Remember, the government's sick. Everyone is sick. You can't fix a sick system because they're made up of sick people. Only one solution to get out of the hell we've dug, and that is for all of us to play our role, reach the tipping point. Let's organize and get a bunch of people to take a solid food vacation. If we can reach the tipping point and do that, everyone's going to correct the fall of mankind. Just like we're not going to drink that bad water anymore. We won't have a mean side to us. We won't have the worst of us taking advantage of us. Indeed, it's a lot simpler than we might think if you understand the role drinking the bad water plays or cooking the food plays. Once you think it out, you realize the first mistake we ever made is the reason why we have all the other problems that we have. And that sure, there's a lot of things that we can do downstream to make things better. But we know the ultimate solution is to go upstream, get reconnected, take that solid food vacation, and you know why? You're in for a treat.